Alma walked out with the check still in her hand. She hadn't folded it, hadn't put it away, just held it between two fingers like it might catch fire if she gripped too hard. The other man was already gone. Not to the restroom. Not to make a phone call. Gone. Out the door. Down the elevator. Probably in his car by now, heading somewhere that didn't include her anymore. The lawyer didn't say anything. Just closed the folder. Stacked papers with the kind of efficiency that suggested this wasn't unusual. She stood there for a moment longer than she should have, waiting for someone to explain, waiting for the mistake to correct itself, waiting for Elias to break character and admit this was some kind of test. He didn't look at her. He looked at the table, at his phone, at nothing in particular. The kind of looking people do when they're done participating, but still physically present. She left the room without saying goodbye. The door didn't slam. It closed softly, like it always did. That moment didn't feel like revenge. It felt like paperwork. But paperwork has a way of deciding everything. Sometimes the trap isn't what someone does to you. It's what you do to yourself. And while the story continues, we'd appreciate any support given. Elias met Alma 2 years earlier. Not at a party. Not through friends. Through a cousin who knew someone who thought they'd get along. It wasn't romantic at first. Just conversation. Easy conversation. The kind that doesn't require effort or performance. She was smart. Funny in a dry way that didn't announce itself. Asked questions that felt genuine. Not the scripted kind people use to fill silence. He liked that. Liked that she didn't need anything from him right away. That she had her own plans. Her own ideas. She talked about going back to school. About starting something of her own someday. Didn't ask about his work. Didn't try to figure out what he was worth. That felt rare. That felt real. They started seeing each other more. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became weekends. She fit into his life without forcing it. Got along with his sister. Laughed at his jokes without overreacting. Didn't demand constant updates or reassurance. He started thinking this might actually work. 6 months in, she mentioned her visa situation. Not dramatically. Just mentioned it. She was here on a student visa that was running out. She'd have to go back soon unless something changed. She wasn't asking him to fix it. Just telling him. Being honest. He appreciated that. Appreciated her not making it his problem. But he wanted to help anyway. He asked what her options were. She explained the process. The timelines. The paperwork. The uncertainty. He listened. Told her he'd think about it. Didn't propose that night. Didn't rush into anything. He thought about it for weeks. Considered what it meant. Whether this was something he was ready for. Eventually, he decided yes. They got married 4 months later. Small ceremony. Just a few people. His sister was there. A couple of friends. Her cousin. Nothing fancy. He didn't care about the wedding. He cared about the commitment. About doing something real for someone he believed in. The immigration process started immediately after. Forms. Interviews. Appointments. He handled most of it. Had the time. She was working 2 part-time jobs and trying to finish her degree. He didn't mind. Liked being useful. Liked feeling like he was building something that mattered. She seemed grateful. Thanked him often. Brought him coffee when he was buried in paperwork. Kissed him on the forehead when he stayed up late organizing documents. It felt like partnership. Like they were on the same team. But small things started shifting. She'd check her phone more during their dinners. Not dramatically. Just enough that conversations ended mid-sentence more often. When he asked about her day, her answers got shorter. Less detailed. She'd say she was tired. That work was exhausting. He believed her because he wanted to. One night he mentioned looking at houses after the immigration process finished. She nodded. Said sure. Didn't ask where or when or what kind. Just returned to scrolling through something on her phone. He noticed but didn't press. Told himself she was stressed. That she'd engage more once the uncertainty ended. The interviews were stressful. Immigration officers asked everything. How they met. What side of the bed they slept on. What he had for breakfast last Tuesday. She stayed calm through all of it. Answered everything without hesitation. Smiled at the right moments. Held his hand when they walked out. He thought they were lucky. That they'd found each other at the right time. That this was the kind of story people told at anniversaries. Then she started working late. 3 nights 1 week. For the next. Said her boss needed extra coverage. That the money was good. He offered to pick her up. She said no. Said a coworker drove her. He asked which coworker. She paused for half a second before answering. Said a name he'd never heard before. He didn't question it. Didn't want to be that person. The one who demanded explanations for everything. But the pause stuck with him. The way she'd needed a moment to remember a detail that should have been automatic. She thought about timing too. Just differently. The approval letter came on a Thursday. He opened it in the kitchen while she was at work. Read it twice to make sure. Then called her. She sounded happy. Relieved. Said she'd pick up dinner on the way home. Something nice. A little celebration. He spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about what came next. Maybe they'd travel. Maybe they'd finally look at houses. Maybe they'd stop living in limbo and start making real plans. She came home with takeout and wine. They ate on the couch. Watched something forgettable on TV. She leaned against him. Told him she loved him. He believed her. 3 weeks later, she asked if they could talk. He assumed it was about plans. About the future. About where they were going next. She sat across from him at the kitchen table. Not next to him. Across. That should have been the first sign. She had papers with her. Folded neatly. Placed between them like a centerpiece. She said she'd been thinking a lot. That she appreciated everything he'd done. That he was a good person. But that she didn't think they were right for each other anymore. That she needed space. Needed to figure out who she was outside of this. That staying together wouldn't be fair to either of them. He didn't understand. Asked her to explain. To give him something concrete. Something he could work with. She kept talking in circles. About growth. About different paths. About how sometimes people outgrow relationships even when there's no specific reason. He asked if there was someone else. She said no. Not in a way that sounded true. Just in a way that sounded final. He didn't shout. Didn't accuse her of using him. Didn't throw anything or storm out. Just sat there trying to make sense of how everything flipped this fast. How someone goes from saying I love you to handing over divorce papers in less than a month. She said she'd already spoken to a lawyer. That it didn't have to be complicated. That they could split things fairly and move on. Said it like she was describing a business transaction. Calm. Reasonable. Detached. He asked her to leave the table. Not the house. Just the table. He needed space to think. She gathered her papers and went upstairs. He sat there alone for 2 hours. Didn't eat. Didn't move. Just tried to figure out what he missed. The other man showed up 3 days later. He didn't know who he was at first. Just someone standing outside the house talking to her. Smiling too much. Standing too close. She looked comfortable. Laughed at something the man said. Touched his arm. It was casual. Familiar. The kind of body language that doesn't develop overnight. He watched from the window. Didn't confront them. Didn't march outside and demand answers. Just watched. Took note. Started understanding that this wasn't sudden. That she didn't wake up one day and decide to leave. That this was planned. That someone else was already in position before she ever sat him down at that table. The man started appearing everywhere after that. At the coffee shop she liked. At the grocery store. In the driveway when he came home from work. Never inside the house. Never crossing that line. But always close. Always visible. Always waiting. She didn't try to hide it anymore. Stopped pretending this was about personal growth or needing space. The man had a name now. Daniel. He worked in finance. Made good money. Drove a car that cost more than most people's yearly salary. She talked about him like he was the future she'd been waiting for. Elias asked her once if this started before the immigration approval. She didn't answer. Just looked at him like the question was irrelevant. Like it didn't matter when it started. Only that it was happening now. He stopped asking questions after that. Stopped trying to understand. The small inconsistencies he'd noticed before suddenly made perfect sense. The late nights. The distracted dinners. The phone calls she took in other rooms. He'd given her the benefit of doubt because he'd wanted the story to be different. Now he knew better. The lawyer meetings began a week later. She hired someone aggressive. Someone who talked about assets and entitlements like they were discussing a corporate merger. He hired someone quieter. Someone who asked a lot of questions and didn't make promises. She wanted half of everything. The house. The savings. The investments. Had a list. An actual itemized list. Her lawyer presented it like it was reasonable. Like this was just how things worked. His lawyer asked for documentation. For proof of ownership. For clarity on what actually existed in his name. That's when things started getting strange. The house wasn't in his name. It was in his sister's name. Had been for years. Not because of Alma. Not because he expected betrayal someday. Just because that's how it was set up when he bought it. His sister had better credit at the time. Cleaner financial history. Made sense to put it in her name for the mortgage. He paid for everything. But on paper, it wasn't his. Her lawyer pushed back. Said it didn't matter whose name was on the deed. That he clearly owned it. That this was just a technicality. His lawyer disagreed. Said ownership was determined by documentation. Not by who paid the bills. The savings accounts were the same way. Opened under his sister's name years ago for tax purposes. He had full access. Could withdraw any time. But legally, they belonged to her. Her lawyer called it fraud. Called it hiding assets. Demanded financial records going back a decade. His lawyer provided everything. Showed the timeline. Showed that none of this was recent. That it wasn't a scheme. Just the way things had been structured long before she ever entered the picture. The investments were similar. Purchased through family trusts. Set up by his father before he passed. Technically owned by the trust. Managed by his sister as executor. He benefited from them, but didn't own them outright. She sat in those meetings getting quieter. Her confidence started cracking. Kept looking at Daniel. Waiting for him to say something. To reassure her. To fix this. Daniel mostly looked at his phone. Nodded occasionally. Stayed non-committal. Her lawyer kept digging. Kept demanding proof that he actually owned something. Anything. Found the cars. 2 of them. Both leased under his sister's business. Found the furniture. Purchased through a company account. Found the electronics. Same thing. It wasn't a conspiracy. Just how his family operated. Everything filtered through structures that protected assets. Minimized taxes. Reduced liability. It was normal for them. Standard practice. But it meant that on paper, he owned almost nothing. Her lawyer asked for a valuation of what could be claimed. His lawyer ran the numbers. Came back with an amount that barely covered the cost of the legal fees. She thought it was a mistake. Demanded a recount. A second opinion. Something. Her lawyer explained that unless she could prove the assets were fraudulently hidden, there was nothing to claim. That the burden of proof was on her. That she'd need evidence of intent to deceive. Evidence that didn't exist. The meetings got shorter after that. Less aggressive. She stopped bringing lists. Stopped talking about entitlements. Just sat there staring at papers she couldn't make sense of. Daniel stopped coming entirely. Said he had work. Said he'd catch up with her later. Later never came. He didn't gloat. Didn't rub it in. Just showed up to the meetings. Signed what needed signing. Answered questions when asked. Stayed quiet the rest of the time. His silence wasn't absence. It was decision. He'd stopped participating in her story the moment he understood what it actually was. The final meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday. She showed up alone. No Daniel. No confident posture. Just her and a lawyer who looked tired. His lawyer slid the settlement across the table. A check. A final number. She picked it up. Read it. Read it again. Then asked what it was. The number was real. Just irrelevant. Barely enough to matter. Not even $500. The cost of splitting a few joint accounts that had almost nothing in them. Her share of money that never accumulated because he never kept much in his own name. She kept shaking her head, saying it couldn't be right, that someone made a mistake. Her lawyer explained again, slowly, that this was accurate, that there was nothing else to claim, that the assets she thought existed weren't accessible. She asked about the house. Her lawyer said it wasn't his to split. Asked about the savings. Same answer. Asked about the cars, the furniture, the investments. Same answer every time. Daniel was supposed to be there. Was supposed to help her through this. Was supposed to be the partner waiting on the other side. But Daniel understood math. Understood that she wasn't walking away with anything. That the plan they'd made required money that didn't exist. He stopped answering her calls 2 days before the meeting. Stopped replying to texts. Stopped existing in her life as quickly as he'd appeared. She signed the papers. Not because she wanted to. Because there was nothing left to fight for. The divorce was finalized within a week. Clean. Simple. Final. Elias asked her to move out. Not cruelly. Just practically. The house wasn't his to let her stay in. His sister owned it. His sister wanted it back under full family control. She had 30 days. She spent those 30 days trying to reach Daniel. Calling from different numbers. Showing up at places she thought he'd be. He was never there. Or he saw her coming and left before she arrived. Either way, The result was the same. She found a small apartment she could barely afford. Moved her things in over a weekend. The cousin who introduced her to Elias helped. Didn't ask questions. Didn't offer advice. Just carried boxes and left. The money she thought she'd have didn't exist. The partner she thought she'd secured disappeared. The life she'd planned evaporated. She was alone in a country that suddenly felt foreign again. Working the same 2 part-time jobs. Living in a space smaller than the closet she had before. People asked what happened. She didn't explain. Just said it didn't work out. That sometimes things end. She stopped going to places where she might run into him. Stopped talking to mutual friends. Stopped pretending everything was fine. He didn't chase her. Didn't send messages. Didn't check in to see how she was doing. Just moved on. Quietly. Without fanfare. Went back to work. Spent time with his sister. Started thinking about what came next. His sister asked him once if he planned it. If he knew what would happen. He said no. Said he just got lucky. That the way their family handled money happened to protect him from something he never saw coming. She didn't push. Just nodded. Told him to be more careful next time. There wouldn't be a next time. Not like that. She tried reaching out 6 months later. Sent a message asking if they could talk. He didn't respond. She sent another one a week later. Same result. She wanted to explain. Wanted to apologize. Wanted something that felt like closure. He didn't know her that. Didn't know her anything. Deleted the messages without reading past the first line. Daniel never reappeared. Not in her life. Not in anyone's story. Moved on to someone else. Someone with better prospects. Someone whose situation didn't collapse the moment it was tested. She heard about it through someone who knew someone. Heard he was engaged. Heard he was doing well. She stopped asking after that. The divorce didn't ruin him. Didn't break him. Just taught him something he didn't know he needed to learn. That people could smile at you every day and still be planning an exit. That love didn't always mean loyalty. That sometimes the thing that saves you is pure accident. He didn't become bitter. Didn't swear off relationships. Just became careful. More aware. Less willing to ignore the quiet signs. She didn't. She expected noise. Whispers. Questions. Expected her name to carry weight. Expected the story to linger. It didn't. People moved on. Mutual friends stopped asking. The ones who knew the details forgot them. Her absence from certain rooms barely registered. The story ended for everyone else the moment the paperwork did. She returned to familiar places out of habit. Cafes she once visited with him. Streets she had memorized by routine. Staff members didn't hesitate when they saw her. Didn't search for recognition. Orders were taken. Payments processed. Interactions completed without memory. It unsettled her more than anger would have. At home, time stretched. Days passed without markers. Notifications came from work. From bills. From distant acquaintances. Never from where she expected. There was no dramatic moment when she realized no message was coming. Just the steady accumulation of absence. Silence that felt finished. She had imagined he would reach out eventually. Not to reconcile. Just to acknowledge what had happened. Even anger would have sufficed. There was none. The absence wasn't cruel. It was complete. She told herself stories to make sense of it. That he was processing. That he needed time. The stories worked for a while. Then they collapsed. He had simply moved past the point where she mattered enough to warrant attention. She stopped blaming him. Not out of forgiveness. Out of clarity. Daniel hadn't been a future. He had been an escape. A shortcut she convinced herself was strategy. Plans required cooperation from reality. Reality had never agreed to her terms. She adjusted her life downward. Cheaper groceries. Longer commutes. Fewer indulgences. Changes that don't feel like loss until they accumulate. She told people the same simple version when asked. That it hadn't worked out. That timing had been wrong. It wasn't a lie. Just not the full truth. The full truth had become too heavy to carry. He existed now only as a closed door in her mind. Not slammed. Just shut. Firm. Unresponsive. The kind that doesn't invite knocking because it makes no promise of being opened. She learned to stop standing in front of it. Life continued. Because it always does. She found stability. Not comfort. Stability. Routines that worked. Patterns that required less hope. It wasn't the life she had wanted. But it functioned. And that was the quiet punishment she hadn't anticipated. Not collapse. Not ruin. Just endurance. The long realization that nothing was coming to save what remained. He faded into abstraction. A reference point. A cautionary example, rather than a memory that hurt. She wondered once if he ever thought about her. The thought didn't last, because she already knew the answer. Some people think revenge requires planning, precision, intent. It doesn't always. Sometimes it arrives through indifference, through being removed from the equation entirely, through realizing too late that the thing you tried to take was never positioned to be taken at all. He didn't outsmart anyone, didn't execute a strategy, didn't even see the danger coming. He just didn't lose. She tried to claim what she believed was owed, and discovered, after everything was signed and finished, that the balance had always been zero. There was no justice in it, no karma, no lesson delivered with emphasis. Just math. Cold, quiet, final. The story ended the moment the papers were signed. Everything after that was simply people continuing on separate paths, carrying what they'd earned, or what they hadn't. This was Revenge Chronicles, and some revenge doesn't look like victory. It looks like absence.